Good morning, those who are on. Okay.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. That's okay. Learning sponsors. Isaac and Evelyn Jackor, in memory of his sister, Rachel Bas Isser, friends of Leona Meisel, in memory of Sabra Bas Hannah Schwindel, those who are here from speaking to make themselves out. Friends of Melaskotsky, Moshe Zelig, Ben Mordechai, Martin Lipman and family in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bas Pinchas. A month of learning, Carol and Josh Sanborn in memory of her father, Yoshua Shia Ben Moshe Yehuda Kohen, Sarah Alpert and family in memory of her husband, Harav Tzvi Lipa Ben Hillel, Josh and Carol Sanborn in memory of his mother, Diana Bas Aryeh Leib and his father, Shmuel Aryeh Ben Baruch, B. Pizer in memory of her mother, Razel Bat Shammai, Leo Tova Zimmer in memory of his father, Steve Ben Israel and his mother, Yocheved Bat Yaakov Menachem Mendel, Mel and Haran Haller in memory of his mother, Fega Bas Yaakov, B. Pizer in memory of her stepfather, Avram Michal Ben Shmuel Halevi, Jill and Perry Meltzer in memory of her father, Yaakov Ben Yosef, a week of learning by Sid Peres in memory of his mother, Yehudis Bas Tzvi, and his father, Chaim Ben Aaron HaKohen, Jack Kaufman in memory of his wife, Devorah Necha Bas Mordechai Tzvi, family of Esther Shepatovsky, in memory of their mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, Esther Riva Bas Batzalel. We also have today being the 8th, I don't have any days of learning. So Minasham is having Aliyah, crank with a few of Velti Yeshua Shemat Aliyah, Lachol Ben Israel, good Gaben Shiyar. Okay. All right. You may remember we made the decision that we did a daf and a half, right? Okay, so that should take us up to basically Mem Gimel Amud Beis.
43B1.
Right.
43B1.
Is where we're going to start, right at the top. Okay. Now, even though Mem Daled looks long, we should be able to get Mem Daled Aleph looks long. We should be able to get through everything fairly smoothly, I hope, this morning. Okay. Okay. So so very quickly we will go back to this whole question of this back and forth of profaning or not profaning, and basically when was that Kohen, what he said, there was this whole machlok. So on the top of Amud Beis, right there, Amar Rav Chisda Amar Rav, he says as follows: Naktar Rosho Shel Aviv. What happens, he says, if a situation occurs and the father's head got removed? Okay, Eino Metamelo, one cannot, in other words, that Kohen cannot. Okay, we normally say that for a family member, a regular Kohen can become Tameh, okay, as opposed to a Kohen Gadol. For any family member, even for a family member, Kohen Gadol, okay? But a normal Kohen could, okay? So the Rav Chisda is clarifying that statement, okay, by saying, but if it's a situation that the father for some reason got decapitated, okay, no, the Kohen could not become Tameh. Oh, we'll get to that. Good question. Let's hold on to it. We're going to see. You must have studied this Gemara before. Okay. Okay. So what happens? So why does Rav Chisda, in the name of Rav, say this? Eino metamei lo. My tama. What's the reasoning? Amakra le'aviv, for his father. Bisman shahu shalem, at the time when the deceased is whole, HWHOLE. Okay. Velo bisman shahu chaser, not at the time that he is missing any body parts. Amarle, Rav Himnuna, saying back to him, Ella me'ata, if that's the case from here, it would seem we could learn, but fikta de arvos, okay, if somebody is traveling in the valley of Aravos, upaskua ganve lereshe, and along came robbers and they decapitated the person's head. Hachinami de lo latame le. It would seem here that here too, for example, that the Kohen would not be able to become Tameh under that situation. Amarle. So he responds. And here's Sid's question. Mate mitzvah ka'amarta? Are you talking about a possible situation of a mate mitzvah? Actually, in other words, it could.
They're in the desert, but there's nobody
Nobody,
around.
there's nobody around. B, it's possible that all you have there is the body, but without the head. Okay? And so who's going to bury? And don't we have a Torah
And
mandated
the sun
requirement, right? A Torah mandated requirement that anybody should, number one. And number two, if you're already saying that the son is a Kohen and he can't bury,
He can hire somebody.
who's going to do it?
He can hire
Okay,
somebody.
well, we'll get to that. Exactly. We're going to get to that point. But that's the question the Gemara is trying to highlight.
Obviously, is it only the head or a finger or a hand or anything?
That's another element. Okay, so what happens? Amarle mate mitzvah kamarta, hashta yesh lomar ba'achrine mechaye. Here, therefore, you would therefore imply, excluding the Kohen's son, others would have the obligation to bury, right? Ba'aviv lo kol shekain. If that's the case, certainly if it's his father, how much more so that he should have the obligation for the Kohen's son to still be Tameh in this situation? V'hai mate mitzvahu. But isn't that the exact situation with the example of a mate mitzvah? Okay, if it's a mate mitzvah and the Torah says anyone has the obligation to bury, shouldn't that apply even to a Kohen? And that Kohen then should be able to be Tameh, become Tameh to fulfill that mitzvah. Vahatanya, but aren't we taught elsewhere in the Breita? Ezehu mate mitzvah, what do we consider to be the status of a mate mitzvah? Kol she'ein lo kovri, one who does not have anyone to perform the burial. Kore va'acherim onim oto. Perhaps the son then could call out to others, okay, and others will come and bury. Okay, ein zeh mate mitzvah. That is not considered then a mate mitzvah. If the son then, who's a Kohen, can pay somebody to do it, is the implication, or there are others who are non-Kohanim that would be willing to do it for him, okay, then that would not make it a mate mitzvah status. All right. Vaha itle bara. But here we say, we talked about his having a son. Kevan dika azil ba'orcha. Okay. So what is he saying here? Right? Is that
He's traveling at night.
okay? So what
and there's
happened? Right.
nobody-
Right. So what happens? The point is, Kevan dika azil ba'orcha, because he's traveling after dark, right, at night.
And in the desert.
Kami she'em lo kovrin dami, because that makes him similar to someone where there might be a mate mitzvah. There would be nobody around usually to do that. Yes. Erwin.
So once he comes in with the ballot almost every night, can you already tell me? Question?
Once he becomes within Dalit Amos,
Wait. Thank you.
it's a valid question. I have to tell you, I would think that might not be the case. Okay? Question usually is contact. That's the issue. So their contact, direct contact with the mace certainly would make him tamei. But even within his Dalit Amos, that may not be the case. Okay? So what happens? May tive. We challenge this as follows. Lo yitma, okay, I'm sorry, la yitma, that he becomes tamei for her. La hu mitamei, ve'eno mitamei le'evareha. Okay, we have a braita that teaches for her, in other words, another family
sister.
member, a sister in this
Yeah, I hope
case,
so.
right? He can become tamei, but not, in other words, for her, what does it mean for her? But not for any of her body parts, okay? Lafi she'eino mitamei la'ever min hachai shel avi. And therefore, we apply this as well and say that for the fact that he does not become tamei for any of the body parts of his father. Aval machzirhu al etzem kisa'ora. Okay, so what does the Gemara want us to understand here? Right? But
If he already buried
Okay.
his
But the-
father, he was a coin, he buried
Right.
his father, and there was something left
Okay.
over to, that's
Yeah.
in Kasora, then he
All
could
right,
go
so-
back.
the question is, you're right, Reuben. I just wanted to phrase it a little differently. Let's assume for the moment that the father was buried, okay? And let's take the example, we said others buried him. The son is a Kohen. He had others bury him. But then it was discovered in the example that we said that since he can't bury it because a body part was missing, then that body part is found. Okay? Can he go back then, retrieve and bury that body part with the rest of the body? That's what the Gemara wants to try to clarify. All right? So the implication is, okay, even though it could be the minimum amount, the olive bulk, okay, that could render him tamei,
Okay?
nevertheless, okay, that's the case. Mai machzirhu al etzem kisora. What do we mean then? When that he comes back, right, that he can rebury, in a sense, part of the situation, right? Love the memra, the imichsar purta. Doesn't that imply that even if it was missing a small amount, okay? So if you're saying that it's acceptable for him to do that, why are you saying earlier that the Gemara says he can only bury him if he's
Oh,
whole? Okay, seems to be a contradiction. Yes, sir.
When they say a body part, they talk about it leaving a piece of skin for a finger,
that's right. That's
any
a
body
Kasora.
part whatsoever.
Let's say even the tip of part of the finger was, right? Right? So what happened? Lo, no, says the Gemara. Hahi Rabbi Yehuda. That's the view of Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanya who teaches elsewhere in a Braita. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, La mitamei, ve'eno mitamei le'evarim. That for her, regarding the sister, as Reuven explained for us, that he could become tamei. Okay, all right. Ve'eno mitamei le'evarim. Okay.
No, it seems good.
You have your phone. Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. Shano mitamei al aver min hachai shel avi.
I'm in shul, I'm in a cheer, I'll call you back.
Okay, hold on, today the close because the shoes are moving. Yes.
I'll call you back, sorry.
Okay. All right. She'eno mitamei al aver min hachai. So what we said, according to that, and Rabbi Yehuda is holding that he cannot become tamei, even from a limb of his father. Aval mitamei hu la'aver min hamet shel avi. but he may become tamei from a limb of his deceased father. Okay, so in other words, he makes a distinction between a single body part, okay, or a small part, and the body itself. Okay, so that's where we're going to get further now. Bahatanya, but isn't it taught elsewhere in a Braita? Rav Kahana Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says as follows regarding that same pasuk: La mitamei, for her he can become tamei. Ve'eno mitamei la'evarim, that he cannot become tamei for body parts. Prat lekazayat min hamet, except if the amount is at least an olive bulk from the deceased. Ukazayat nitzal, okay. Umalei tarvad rakav, or else it's a what I'll call a shovel full of dust from the bones. Okay, Yachol,
That's some sort,
what?
that's so.
Saved. In other words, that we're talking here about a scoop of dirt that contains the remnants of the body. Okay, it could be from the. Okay, could be from an example where they buried somebody in one location, and now they want to transfer the body to another location. Okay. All right. So what happens? When it's Almalei Tervad Reka, right? Yachol lo yitamei l'shidra l'gulgolet l'rav binyana. It's possible we might have thought that if you're going to say that Rav Kahana holds that way, what about the fact that elsewhere we learn that a person, okay, cannot become tamei regarding the shidra, the backbone, the gulgolet, the head, the skull, the rov binyanav, or the majority of the skeleton, the rov ularov minyana, or if it's just the general majority number of bones, okay,
Even though it's-
okay, and it may not be attached,
Right.
okay, and I'm going to come back to this point in a second. Kativ, but it's written va'amarta alehem hosif lach. Okay, then it says to him, you add to this, right? Hakatuv tum'a acheret. Okay, that in other words, that would seem to imply that that could add an additional level of defilement. Yachol lo yitma, we get to today's stuff now. On top of Mem Daled, Yachol lo yitma l'shidra l'gugolet l'rov binyano shel achilim. Maybe we're talking about that what they were saying was that these body parts of others as opposed to direct family members. Amart, you say, ma achoto miyuchedet. Whereas we darshaning that same pasuk all along, la mitama, to his sister. All right, that there you're saying permitted. Shegufa talui bo, because her burial is really dependent upon him to do that, particularly if she's not married, right? If she's married, the chiyuv would be the husband, exactly. Umitame l'shidra l'gulgolet l'rov binyana l'rov minyana. All right, and he could become tamei then, regarding the backbone or the skull or the majority of the bones, okay, numerous wise, or the skeleton. Afkol shegufo talui bo mitamei l'shidra l'gulgolet l'rov binyano l'rov minyano. So likewise, anyone else, okay, whose responsibility has the major responsibility for any body parts, okay, to bury, so therefore they could become tamei in that situation. Hahunami Rabbi Yehudahi. That again also is the view of Rabbi Yehuda. But what happens? Rav Da'amar, whereas Rav says, Ki hai Tana, the Tanya, Ma'aseh Shamet Aviv shel Rabbi Yitzchak. And Rav tells us that once this was similar to what was taught by another Tana, who shared with us the incident regarding the death of the father of Rabbi Yitzchak Beginzi, right? Right? Okay. So where was he? Right? That's another scholar. All right. Right. Uba'u v'hodi'uhu la'achar shalosh shanim. And they came and they notified him after 3 years. Okay. Now, why was that the case? The Gemara is not going to tell us why he didn't hear about the death till 3 years later.
Way up in the dia, go back and forth.
Could be. All right. But okay. Ginzak. I'm looking at a note here, just a quick second.
Ginzak was sort of in a far away, it wasn't.
Northwestern Persia. Yeah. Okay. So what happens? In other words, apparently he, right? So what happened? They notified him after 3 years. Uba v'sha'al at Rabbi Yoshua ben Elisha, and he comes and asks a shaila. Va'ar b'zakenim sham'u v'amru. So he asks in the either Beis HaMidrash or a number of his colleagues. La'aviv, when the pasuk says this is what they tell him, bisman shahu shalem, at the time when he is whole, velo bisman shahu chaser, and not at the time when he is missing body parts. Okay, so the implication could have been that he wanted to transfer the body from wherever it was buried
To their base.
to some other location, either the family plot, for example, or something else. And they told him that the implication was he cannot do it himself. All right, I'm sure. In other words, he couldn't go and become Tameh to do it. Okay, assuming he's a Kohen. Okay,
Right, even he couldn't get anybody else to do it either,
right,
because it has to be Bisman Shu Sholem,
right.
and the body is already. That's
Deteriorating
disintegrated somewhat.
significantly. I don't know if anybody's ever participated.
$40 scroll, but it says here
Yeah,
that 3 years it takes for a body to be completely.
completely.
That's what he said.
Yeah. Okay.
It's certainly decomposed.
All right.
There said that he permitted now to come in contact with his father's remains.
Right.
So he's saying after 3 years.
After 3 years. I don't know. I assume that whoever wrote the commentary may have checked on that scientifically. Okay. I do know that depends. I once had to assist another colleague in making those arrangements, that there was actually a transfer. They were digging up the remains from one cemetery, and they were going to, I hate to use the word package, but that's what they were going to do, basically transfer to Eretz Yisrael for burial. And he had permitted it, but he felt he needed at least one other aid, okay, to do so. All right. Okay, now we're going to get to our new Mishnah. Now, this is a fairly long Mishnah and a Gemara, and I want us just to understand that what happens is the Mishnah is going to present to us the 3 prohibitions that we're all familiar with ordinarily for a Nazir. From there, it's going to say, but in some cases, prohibition A is more stringent than prohibition B and C. And in some cases, B might be considered more stringent than A and C. And in some cases, C might be more stringent or lenient than the others. Okay, A and B. All right. And then the Gemara is really going to discuss that whole flip-flop. All right. So if we can follow that perspective, I think it will help us appreciate the flow of the Gemara. Because somebody might say, like you say that with that A is more stringent than B and C, or maybe I should flip it and just use a different language and say, hey, B and C is more lenient than A. Okay, all right. Okay, we ready? Matnitin. We're in the middle of Mem Daled, about 1/3 down the Yam. Okay. Matnin. Shlosha minin asurin benaz. We know that there are 3 varieties of prohibitions associated with Nazarethship, right? 1, hatuma. Okay. By the way, interesting to note the order that the Mishnah presents these in. Okay, as if to imply, okay, that an order that we would think of as most stringent, second, third. That's going to be also an underlying question here. Okay. Okay. So, hatuma, in other words, tumas hameis is the first. V'hatiglachet, getting a haircut, right? V'hayotze min hagefen, and anything that evolves from a vine. Okay. So that would seem to imply not just wine, but other grape products as well. Right? Okay. Mishnah continues. Chomer betuma, there's a stringency with tuma, ubitiglachet, and with hair cutting, mi biyotze min hagefen, more than the product of the vine. Okay, why is that? Shehatumah v'hatiglachet sotrin. Why? Because when it's a situation of tumas hames or haircut, one forfeits. In other words, the Nazir forfeits all the previous days that had counted, okay, during that term, okay, whatever the term is. V'hayotze min hagefen, and that which evolves from the vine, eino soter. It does not make the Nazir forfeit. Okay? Now we go to second example. Chomer biyotze min hagefen. There's a stringency with what comes out of the vine. Mi betuma ubetiglachet, more than, right, tumas hames or haircut. Shehayotze min hagefen, that which evolves from the vine, lo hutar miklalo, that it doesn't permit. There is nothing in general permitted from it. In other words, it's all
Even if it
inclusive.
was a mitzvah,
Right, all inclusive, right? That, okay? So in other words, any product from the vine under any circumstances. Okay, phrase it that way. Whereas, tuma v'tiglachet, hutru miklala, whereas situations of tuma or situations of hair cutting, there is some permission from an overall total prohibition. How? Okay. Number 1, patiglachet mitzvah. There we might have an example where the hair cutting is a mitzvah. For example, somebody who was a mitzora who became a nazir. All right, and that person, okay, their Nazareth, their status has to be that they have a mitzvah to shave. All right, and that when they're okay in that situation, or ubameit mitzvah, or in the case of a mate mitzvah, they might become tamei, okay, to fulfill the requirement of doing a mate mitzvah. But continues the Mishnah, v'chomer betum'ah mi b'tiglachet, and there's a stringency in regarding tuma, okay, from a hair cutting. Why? Shehatuma soteret et hakol, because tumas hames forfeits the entire amount of the term, v'chayavin aleha korban, and one must then, in addition, bring an offering. V'tiglachet eina soteret ela shloshim, whereas the hair cutting only makes one forfeit no more than a single term. Okay, ve'ein chayavin aleha korban, and there is no requirement to bring an offering.
Yeah, I know this was mentioned before, but if a Nazir had a different type of tumah that wasn't tumas mace, is,
That would not,
That would
not forfeit.
only tumas mace.
only
Tumas mace is it? Yeah. Okay, Gemara. All right, now, so the Gemara wants to look at this comparison back and forth, and it starts off with its first question. Okay? And asks, Vituma, and regarding Tumas Mace, Lo Tutar Michlala, why shouldn't we say that it should free one in general? Kal v'choma miyayin. I might learn that as a kal v'choma argument from the example of wine. Umayayin she'eno soter lo hutar mimiklalo, whereas wine, for example, does not forfeit. Okay, and excuse me, and it also doesn't
no
relieve
permission
one.
To drink for
Right.
any reason at all.
Doesn't relieve one from a general prohibition.
Right.
Tuma, tumas mace, shesoteret, whereas tuma that forfeits entirely, a no din. Doesn't it seem logical using the kal v'chomer, shelo tutar miklala, that should also, okay, shouldn't have any exemptions?
Any exemption.
Right, that case. Talmud Lomar, says the text, La aviv ul'imo lo yitama. For his father, for his mother, he doesn't become tameh. La aviv ul'imo lo yitama. For his father and his mother, he doesn't become tameh. Avam metameh hu, the mate mitzvah. But he could become tameh for a mate mitzvah. So therefore, based on that drash of the Torah,
It's chuter v'chlal.
okay, that's why Tuma has the exemption of and being huta miklal. Okay, let's go. Next, v'yayin, and what about wine? Yoter miklalo. Right, what about that? The wine that therefore
It should also be.
right. So if
there
I'm
should also
thinking,
be an exemption.
if I'm looking at exemption, we've just said in our Mishnah that any product of the grape, such of the vine, such as wine, there's no exemptions whatsoever, no, under any circumstances. All right.
So Rabbi Green, so if someone had become a Nazir within 30 days of the Seder, he would have to forfeit the,
That's right.
Right. Okay.
Because no one's, that's what it means.
Right.
Lo chuter v'chlal, there's no exemptions.
Right. So the Gemara questions, Kal v'chomer mituma. Maybe I would learn a Kal v'chomer here from Tuma and say, I could argue. In other words, I'm trying to find now an exemption from Yotzei HaGefen. If I'm saying Tuma gives me an exception, why can't I find an exemption or an exclusion from Yotzei HaGefen? Here's the answer. Ma Tuma shehi soteret hutra miklala. Okay, whereas Tuma, which forfeits all, does, I'm going to say it positively, permits from the general prohibition. Yayin she'eno soter, but wine, where it does not forfeit, no din sheyutar miklalo. Regarding wine, then, shouldn't it be logical that there should also be some exemption from the total prohibition? Amar Kra, but our pasuk says, miyayin v'shechar yazir, that when the Nazirite takes his vow, right, it applies to wine and old wine and new wine, could be one translation, or wine and further strong drink, okay, he takes his vow, namely, la'asur yayin mitzvah, kevan reshut, okay, right, to make the fact that any drinking of wine that we would ordinarily associate with a mitzvah is just as forbidden as wine that is simply drunk for pleasure. Okay? Right. Fine, let's go on. V'yayin, you store it to cold.
I have,
Yes,
is that if an individual goes and makes a budget Nazareth, knowing that Pesach is coming up.
They shouldn't. They shouldn't. That's the whole point.
Is that a problem?
Yes, yes, that was Bob's question. That's Bob, that was Bob's point as well. Okay. Okay, now we could get to a whole different question of other things, but we won't right now. Okay, so we said V'yayin yistor takol. So if that's the case, what about wine, drinking everything from the wine, from the vine? Shouldn't that then also require a forfeiture of more than just a single term, right? Kal v'chomer mituma. How much more so than tumas hameis? Why? Ma tum'ah shehutra miklala. Whereas tuma, where we say there is an exemption from the general prohibition, nevertheless, so teret et hakol, it forfeits the entire term of the Nazarethship. Yayin shelo hutar miklalo. Wine where there is no exemption from the general prohibition, lo kol shekain sheyistor. All the more so, shouldn't it also then forfeit the entire term? Amakra, says the pasuk. Vayamim harishonim yiplu, and the earlier days will fall aside. Right? Ki tameh nizro. Why? Because it's when he has become impure regarding his vow. Tum'ah soteret. So the tum'ah then makes it forfeit. The ein hayayin soter, and not the wine forfeits. Let's go to another possibility. V'hatichlachet to store it hakol. Maybe we should argue that hair cutting is going to result in a complete forfeiture of the whole term. Kal v'chomer mituma. I might learn that logically from the example of tuma, right? Uma tuma shelo asuba mitame kimitame. Whereas in regards to tuma, okay, tumas hames, one who becomes tame does not render another person tame. Nevertheless, soteret et hakol. Okay, the person who is initially tame, and was a nazir, must forfeit their entire term. Tiglachet, haircutting, she'asuba migaleya. One who has taken a haircut and then does a haircut to another, kemit galeach. Okay, eno din she'tistor takol. Should not it be logical that therefore kal v'chomer, that other person also, okay? Amar kra, says the pasuk, vayamim harishonim yiplu, ki tamei nizro. Again, I cite the same pasuk, right? That the earlier days fall aside when he becomes tamei from his vow of Nazarethship. Tum'ah soteret et hakol. This tells us that the tuma status forces the forfeiture of all the term. Ve'ein tiglachet soteret et hakol. But a haircut does not force the forfeiture of the entire term. Furthermore, v'tum'ah na'aseh ba mitamei kemitamei kal v'chomer mitiglachet. Okay, why don't we say that? That the tuma, all right, that causes one to become tamei can be transferred to somebody else. And therefore, how much more so? The same applies to a haircutting. Umat tiglachet she'ena soteret ela shloshim yom. And whereas the haircutting, okay, does not force abstention except for 30 days, asaba megaleach kemit galeach. It can cause one who got a haircut and then does a haircutting to somebody else. Okay, but it doesn't change the status of that person. The second person who got the haircut, tum'ah shehi soteret et hakol, whereas tumas hameis, which causes the forfeiture for the entire amount, eino din shene'aseh ba mitamei k'mitamei, doesn't logically the person who's tamei coming in contact with a second person make that second person tamei? And if that second person is a nazir, shouldn't that then affect their nazirate status? Amakra, again, says a pasuk, v'tamei rosh nizro. Okay, and it causes the tumor on the head, okay, of the person, I'm translating out, who made the vow. Right? L'mitamei rosh nizro, v'tiglachet lo ne'aseh ba megaleach k'mitgaleach. Right? So what does it say? The mitamei rosh nizro, that it only causes the tumor for the person specifically who made the nazir vow. Okay. V'tiglachet lo ne'aseh ba megaleach k'mitgaleach, and a haircut. Okay, doesn't that make the person who shaved his hair doing it to another one? Shouldn't that affect him? Kal v'chomer mituma. How much more so from tuma? Tuma shehi soteret et hakol lo asuba mitamei k'mitamei. Whereas tuma that forces an abstention of the entire term, it does not make one person tamei to another. Okay. Sorry, that's okay. Tiglachet she'ena soteret, the hair cutting that doesn't, okay, cause total abstention. Ela shloshim yom, but rather simply 30 days. Lo kol shekain shelo na'aseh megaleach k'mitgaleach. Doesn't, therefore, that would make the one who shaved second similar to the one who shaved first. All right. Amakra, says the pasuk regarding the one, okay, who was the initial nazir. Ta'ar lo ya'avor al rosho kari bey. We would therefore cite that pasuk, that the razor should not come on his head, and read it lo ya'avor hu. That, okay, that it does not go on his. V'lo ya'avor la'acheri la'acher, but it does not apply to another person. V'tiglachet lo tatir miklala. Okay, and what about the fact that we said that the hair cutting, okay, does not exempt us in general from the general prohibition? Kal v'chomer miyayin. Maybe I should learn that from wine. Umayayin she'eno soter. I could argue again that where wine does not force total abstaining, lo hutar miklalo, and it does, there is no exemption from its total prohibition. Tiglachet shesoteret, whereas hair cutting that has the characteristic compared to wine that it does force abstaining, eino din ela shetotar miklala, shouldn't it also then have some exemption from its general prohibition? Amar Rachmana, says the Torah. Rosho va'amar Rachmana zkano. Okay, so we saw two different views as where they got tiglachet, one from his head, one from his beard. Okay, and so as a result, the tiglachet lo tastor klal, and therefore the haircut doesn't result in a total abstaining. Kal v'chomer miyayin. Maybe I would learn that again, kal from the wine. Umayayin shelo hutar miklalo, and whereas wine, there is no exemption from its total prohibition, but nevertheless, a no soter tiglachet, it does, right? And it doesn't any abstention. Tiglachet, whereas a haircutting, shehutra miklala, where there is the existence of an exemption from the general prohibition, a no din shalot to store. Shouldn't we argue then that it shouldn't have any abstaining? Ba'inan gidul se'ar bahaleka. If that's the case, we've said that we require at least a certain period of time that reflects on enough time to have hair growth. Okay? Be'inyan gidul se'ar bahaleka, and then there wouldn't be enough. Vayayin yistor shloshim yom, and wine we say, okay, basically forces abstaining, okay, forfeiting, 30 days. Kal v'chomer mitiglachet. How much more so than the haircutting? Ma tiglachet shehutra miklala. Whereas haircutting, there is an exemption from the general prohibition. Soteret, but it still causes abstaining, forfeiting, Yayin, shelo hutar miklala. Whereas wine, where there is no exemption from the general prohibition, a no din sheyistor, shouldn't there also therefore logically be a situation that it would cause forfeiture? Midehu tama elamishum gidul seyah. That thing there, the reason being is because with the hair, we say there has to be a minimum amount of growth, right? Gabayayin hakaim saro. But regarding the wine, the hair is there. Okay, right? It's there. The hair is not a problem. Okay, just right. We'll turn the page. All right, hold on. Okay. All right. So now, so the Mishnah, new Mishnah on 44b1, right? Matnitin tiglacha tum akitzad. When regards to the hair cutting, right? On what situation do we say, okay, is there tuma? At what point?
When he comes, Tomei has to cut his hair.
Right. In other words, let's take right.
Right.
Let's take the example as Ruvain is pointing out to us. We had a status of hair cutting in two situations. I'll phrase it a little differently, but that's the point you're making. Good. On the one hand, we know that somebody who completes their term of Nazarethship as part of the purification or part of the return has to do two things. They must get a haircut and they must bring offerings. Okay? Offerings, sacrifices. Okay? When do they do that? Okay? Let's assume the person took a 30-day term. Okay? He finishes on the 30th day. He's now finished. What does he do?
Brings on the 31st.
Okay, so he gets his haircut, okay, later that 30th day, okay, but he has to wait till sundown and then he brings his offering the next morning.
Right.
Okay? On the other hand, our second case of hair cutting would be if the Nazir became Tameh. He became Tameh during the 30-day term. Okay, what does he do? All right, he still has to get a haircut, still has to bring offerings. He has to wait 7 days to complete his tumah. Okay, and then he has to finish up his Nazarethship. Okay,
That's just kind of over. because
Right.
It was so.
okay, so there's a difference then between the Nazir Tameh and what we'll call the Nazir Tahor. Okay, so now we come back into our mission. Tiglacha Tum'ah. When the Nazir became Tameh during his term, okay, how is he supposed to behave? How is he carrying out? Okay. Hayam mazeh b'shlishi u'b'shvi'i. They sprinkle him during that week that he's at the Tameh, on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Okay. Umegaleach b'shvi'i. And then he shaves on the 7th day, says the Mishnah. Umevi korbanotav b'shmini. And he brings his offerings on the 8th day. Tanakama.
How does he come near a priest?
That-
So on the 7th day,
We're gonna
the
see.
second spritz, he was already tahor. And then he can bring the corbans on the next day.
Okay, we'll see. All right, so that could be part of the question. Okay, but we see he gets sprinkled the 3rd day of the week, the 7th day of the week. All right, after that, he then shaves on the 7th day. Okay, so the shaving then becomes part of his
Tahira.
tahara process, right? And then he can bring he has to wait because he's a chaser kippurim until nightfall, right? And then the next day, he can bring his offerings.
Right.
Right? So he doesn't bring his offerings till he's gone through all the way up to that. Okay? So Mishnah continues. V'im gilach b'shmini. And if he got his haircut on the 8th day, Mevi korbanotav bo bayom. He can then bring his offering on the very same day. Okay, if it's the 8th, if not divrei Rabbi Akiva, that's the view of Rabbi Akiva, that he could bring it on, get his haircut on the 8th day, bring the offerings the same day. Amarle Rabbi Tarfon challenges and says, Ma bein zeh mitzorah. What's the difference then between this Nazir who became Tameh and the Mitzorah? Right? Amarle, he said to him,
The Mitzorah doesn't cut his hair till the 8th day.
okay, so what happened? In other words, the Mitzorah has to do both, cut his
On the
hair
8th day, cut his hair.
and bring his offerings, because for the Mitzorah, the Tiglachet is Me'akep. That's the point.
So the Gemara's asking the question. what's
Rabbi
the difference
Tarfon's
between
asking,
That the Nazir
Right.
could cut his hair on the 7th day.
and then bring the next day.
The next day.
Amarle, so Rabbi Akiva answers, Zeh taharato tluya biyamav, okay, that he argues for the Nazir, his purification is dependent on the number of days. Mitzorah tarato tluya b'tiglachto. Sorry. Mitzorah, his purification is dependent on his getting his haircut. Ve'eno mavi korban ela im kain hayam me'urav shamish. And the Mitzorah cannot bring his korban until, right, sun has set. Right? Gemara asks the following: Kibla mine olo. Did Rabbi Tarfon accept the argument of Rabbi Akiva or not? Tashma, listen to the following Breita that will try to give us an answer. The Tani Hillel, as was taught by Hillel, and it wasn't Hillel the elder, it's probably a later Hillel. Gilech b'shmini mevi korbonotav b'tshi'i. If he got his haircut on the 8th day, right? What happens? He must bring his offerings, the Mitzorah, on the 9th day. Okay, which would seem to imply, no, that Rabbi Tarfon did not accept Rabbi Akiva's explanation. Ve'isal geda'atcha kibla mineh. Okay, and if you were to think that Rabbi Tarfon did accept Rabbi Akiva's explanation,
Not the case.
okay, laitai korbanot b'shmini, let him bring his offerings on the 8th day. Amar Rava, says Rava, lo kasha, it doesn't have to be problematic. Ha, in our Mishnah, to taval b'shvi'i, that he immersed on the 7th day. Ha, in the Braita, de lo taval b'shvi'i, that he did not immerse on the 7th day. Amar Abaye, and so now Abaye says, Ashkechatinhu lechavre de Rav Natan ba Oshaya, the Yadvin Ka'amri. I happened to meet up with some of the colleagues or students, friends, that of Rav Natan bar Oshaya. Okay, the Yadvin becoming, and they were sitting and discussing the following: Uva lifnei Hashem el petach ohel moed v'natnam el hakohen. Okay, that based on the pasuk that says that he must bring before Hashem to the opening of the ohel moed and give it to the kohen. A matai huba. At what point does he come in? Does he bring his offering? Bizman shahu taval, at the time when he immerses. Va'asaha rev shemesh, and has waited out till after nightfall. And yes,
The pasuk is talking about a zav.
right. Okay, all right, but the zav is our parallel to the Metzorah. Okay, so that's the implication. While it focuses on the zav, it's trying to use that as the
pasuk
answer.
clearly is telling you about the zav, but
Right,
he has to have hair of shemesh.
right. So in other words, he could likewise, as the Metzorah, have immersed on a certain day, but he still must wait till the end of that day, till sundown, before he can bring his offerings, which is the next day. Okay, so what happens?
But it wouldn't need to be sprinkled.
No, he does still.
I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Arev Shemesh and Lo Taval Ba'asarev Shemesh. If he didn't immerse, right, and the day passed, Lo, he cannot bring his offering then. Alma, therefore, this seems to imply Kasavar, right? Tevu Yom Shel Zav Kizav Dami. Okay, that it must seem to imply that the Zav who has immersed, nevertheless, through the remaining of that day, okay, that he's waiting for sundown, he is still ritually impure as if he were still a real Zav, right?
Right.
Okay, so what happens? Amina lahan ana, and I said to them, Abai, okay, actually it's Rav. Ella, me'ata, if that's the case, gabe nazir tame nami dichti. Okay, so shouldn't the same thing apply in our situation regarding a nazir who became tame? Because there too, it says veheviotam, that the pasuk also says he has to bring it to them. Okay, namely, El HaKohen, El Petach, El Moed. He also has to do like the Zav. So that must mean he also should have to wait after his Tiglachat, okay, and wait till Erev Shemesh before he can bring his offering. Okay, what happens? So that again would also seem to imply that the view of Rabbi Tarfon was correct. All right. Ematai Uba, when does he come? Bisman Shetaval Va'asa Ha'erev Shemesh. Okay, the time that he both immerses and waits till sundown, and we'll just roll over the tiny bit on the top. Mikdei Sha'arei Nikanor. Okay, why? Because we're then going to get into the question of how is it that the Metzora can come close, all right, to the gates of the temple, because we know he can't go into the temple precinct, but he can only go up to the gates of Nikanor. Mikdei Sha'arei Nikanor, Hecha Kaimin, V'Kesha'arei Leviah. Right, and that's where we'll pick up on the top of Mem, right? Mem Hey tomorrow. All right. Okay, everybody, take care. Have a good day.
Rabbi, thank you very much.
Okay.